Right, oh, yeah.
Or does anybody smoke?
No, I don't.
Let's begin tonight. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. I'm going to read from the letter of Paul to the Romans. Let every person be subordinate to the higher authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been established by God. Therefore, whoever resists authority opposes what God has appointed, and those who oppose it will bring judgment upon themselves. For rulers are not a cause of fear to good conduct, but to evil. Do you wish to have no fear of authority? Then do what is good, and you will receive approval from it. For it is a servant of God for your good. But if you do evil, be afraid, for it does not bear the sword without purpose. It is the servant of God to inflict wrath on the evildoer. Therefore, it is necessary to be subject not only because of the wrath, but also because of conscience. This is why you also pay taxes, for the authorities are ministers of God, devoting themselves to this very thing. Let us pray. God our Father, as we come to you during this Advent season, help us to be open to your word and to learn more about what your leadership and what authority is for us today in our universal church, in the church that is our diocese, and in the church that is our parish here at St. Francis Xavier. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen.
Amen.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, today's topic was about leadership. And I wanted to talk about really kind of how the church is structured and leadership within, as I said, the larger universal church, the church that is our diocese, and then the church here at our parish. And what are those unique roles that people play within that church? Okay? So, and some things I may repeat that you know already, but I hate to kind of assume that everybody knows everything that we've been talking about. So kind of bear with me if I've repeated something that you've said that you may have heard before. Okay, when we talk about the universal church, the head, I won't make a big triangle. The head of the church is the Pope. Pope comes from the Latin, from Papa, which really is like a father. And our Pope is Benedict XVI. I don't know my room. I had to stop and think what it is. Our Pope is Benedict XVI. There are certain titles that he has. He's called Supreme Pontiff. Vicar of Christ. Bishop of Rome. And one of the things I just want to make sure we understand, here in the United States, for government purposes, we have our country divided up into like a congressional district. We're the 6th district for the state of Missouri. A diocese is just simply a geographic area that the church has designated. And the head of a diocese is a bishop. And sometimes the diocese can be very large and encompass a large geographic area. Sometimes it may be a small metropolitan area like New York City or Rome. But one of his titles as Pope is Bishop of Rome. And we'll get back to this in just a few minutes. Along with certain titles, there are only certain things that the Pope can do. Only the Pope can appoint other bishops. He can appoint men to the office of cardinal. We'll talk about this in just a few minutes. He can create dioceses, canonize saints, and then this is when it kind of gets us in trouble. He can speak, not in trouble, but it's hard sometimes to understand. Speak infallibly on matters of morals and faith. So this means that when the Pope speaks infallibly, it means he can't be wrong. But this doesn't mean that he's going to wake up tomorrow morning and say, you have to believe the world is flat. Okay, that's not a matter of moral or faith. When he proclaims something like Mary's Immaculate Conception, Mary was conceived without original sin, when he proclaims something like that, we know that it's true. Only the Pope can do these things. He can't sort of dictate this out to somebody else to do. These are only things that he can do. And we're going to talk about this and really this as part of our presentation for tonight. At any point during the presentation you have questions, just raise your hand or let me know. Because, as you can imagine, one of the other things I meant to mention was that, remember, Vatican City is its own country. So, just as we have ambassadors, the United States has ambassadors to other countries, the Pope has like a legal ambassador to represent Rome in other countries. That's called the Papal Nuncio. So there's a Papal Nuncio to the United States, one for Canada, one for Mexico, one for France. It's not really so much a diplomat, although they could be. Sorry, my spelling's not. If I don't have my spell check, I'm totally lost. But it's not so much a diplomat as we tend to think, but they could advise, a leader of the country if they need it. But they serve as sort of the Pope's representative in another country, because, like I said, it is another country. So in addition to being the head of the church, he's also the administrator for that territory that's Vatican City. How many people have been to Vatican City or to Rome? Show of hands. I think it's the world's smallest country. So he does have things he has to do with that in addition to these duties here. Now, pardon me?
What's Vatican City?
Vatican City, it's a place inside of Rome itself. There's the city of Rome, and then if you go within it, it's just a small city. It's just called Vatican City. The Vatican, we'll talk about that in just a second. No matter how I stand, people are not going to be able to see the board. But it's just Vatican City is just a place, okay? But the Pope, to run the universal church, he has to have all kinds of men to assist him. Part of it I talked about earlier was like the secretariat. My spelling's not going to be very good, so I'm glad don't take any notes. I guess this isn't going to be right. But this would be like the Foreign Diplomatic Corps. But he also has councils, commissions, tribunals, the press that comes out of the Vatican, things like even the Swiss Guard, the men who guard the Pope, the Bishop's Synod. All of these things are sort of like departments. Like we have a Department of State, Department of Education, Department of Health and Human Services. These different congregations, councils, commissions, tribunals are the kind of the governing administrative body of the church. And they kind of I don't want to say they dictate, but they create really kind of how we as the faithful live out the church. Now, one of the things that's still going on, if you come to church and you're with someone who's been to church before, when we say the Mass responses, some people say a different response than what is in the book. Those translations is something that went through one of these commissions. A few years ago, it's been since I've been at the Abbey, someone, like a representative from the Vatican, came to the seminary, came to Conception Seminary, to be sure that the seminary was teaching all the things that the Vatican says is required for men studying for the priesthood. So really all these facets that we don't stop to think about, there's commissions on art, the Bible, archaeology, science, the different canon laws, all of these different departments, let's say, really help the Pope run the church, okay? And for the most part, the men who run these commissions, councils, they have the office of cardinal. Now, cardinal is not, next year we'll have a presentation on holy orders, priest, deacon, and pope. Some of these are not, priest, deacon, and bishop. Some of these that we're talking about are not a holy order, they're not in the Bible, but they're offices that have been created to help with the church. A man, once again, only the Pope can appoint a cardinal. And very often the cardinal is an archbishop, he's a bishop, but he is a special advisor and counselor of whatever to the Pope. Okay, only certain men can be appointed to the office of cardinal. Now, Benedict XVI just created new cardinals. I think the last count was 183 cardinals, and they represent men from all over the world. Okay? The most important, there's about 183 cardinals. 120 of these cardinals are under the age of 80. And you may think, well, why is that? In part because the most important duty that the cardinals have is to elect a new pope. And only those cardinals who are under 80 can participate in the election. Okay? So they elect a new pope. So when
Which is one of them.
it doesn't have to be one of the cardinals, it can be one of the men, it could be one of these 120, but it could be another bishop that these men know about. It could be the bishop of, I don't know, Mexico City, the bishop of New York City. It doesn't have to be one of these 120, but it can be another man that's known to them. But when Pope Benedict XVI dies, when he dies, all the cardinals will gather to Rome, will go to Vatican City, they will go to the Sistine Chapel. They're locked in the Sistine Chapel. It's called the conclave. I'm not sure, I'm guessing it's the same in Italian. In Spanish, we would say conclave with a key. They're locked in with the key, and they can't leave until they elect the new pope. So, they, in that meeting at the Vatican Council, in the Sistine Chapel, when they meet, they obviously have to talk to one another to see what man has the qualities that can lead the pope, that can lead the church. It's a very secret process. Once the men vote, their votes are taken up and then they're counted. If they have any kind of notes or any kind of material that they've written as they talk to other men, all of that is burned once they count the votes. They need 2/3 to be elected as pope. If they don't reach the 2/3, then the ballots, all that information is burned. And you may have seen when John Paul II died and Pope Benedict was elected, the faithful gather in St. Peter's Square and they look up to see the smoke. If it's black smoke, it means they haven't elected a new pope. But after a while, if they're still having trouble with this 2/3, they can go to a simple majority. If they're kind of deadlocked, it can move down to a simple majority. But once they've elected the new pope, then they burn the ballots and white smoke comes out, and all the faithful in St. Peter are happy. What do they say? Habemus Papam, we have a pope. So the most important job for the cardinals really is to elect the new pope, and only the cardinals do this. Okay? So in addition to having responsibilities over here to help the pope govern and administer the church, they also elect the new pope. Okay? Now even though, just as an example, when we talked about the translation for the liturgy that we just went through here just last year, they still have to be approved by the Pope. So even if the commission says, oh, we want to have this, and the Pope still sees something not quite right with it, it still has to go back, and they have until it gets his final approval.
Like a veto.
They don't. No, there's no veto. He can veto. Only the Pope can veto it.
I
So
know, it's like a veto.
it's kind of like a veto. Yes, it's kind of like a veto. But the church is not. This is one of the things that if you're coming to the church from another faith tradition, it's a little hard because it's not a democracy. We're going to talk about this later on. We as the faithful don't have a say in who our leaders are. And when I first became involved in RCAA, my friend, her name's Carol, she was Presbyterian. And she was converting to Catholicism because her husband. And she said this whole thing, the idea that we don't pick our own leaders was the hardest thing for her to accept, even more than the Blessed Sacrament or going to confession or the Pope, because at her church, she was on the committee to pick the new pastor. And she didn't understand how the people could have a leader if they didn't know who they were. She told me that was the biggest thing she had in coming to the Catholic Church, which is how our leaders are appointed to us. So when you say a veto, even in Congress, a veto can be overridden. Congress can override the president's veto. That's not the case here. If the Pope says no, it's no. It has to go back. There isn't a voting. They don't go back and say, oh, well, we have the 3/4 to pass it. It doesn't happen that way here. Okay? So this is sort of how the church is set up at a universal level. Okay? But these things do affect us, but not as much as what goes on more locally for us. Here at a more local level, which would be, the diocese. And our diocese is Kansas City, St. Joe. St. Joseph. Okay, and the head of the diocese, of course, is the bishop. And our bishop is Robert Finn. Now, as I mentioned before, only the Pope, can appoint a bishop. So if Bishop Finn were to leave, if he were to resign, and we needed a new Pope, what would happen would be, there's a lot of things happen. Bishop Finn, if he's retiring, he would hand his resignation in to the papal nuncio for this country. And he would in turn turn it over to the Vatican. The other thing that I should talk about, when we talk about, there's a couple of different names. They call it, Vatican City. That administrative part of the church can be called, it's called the Vatican, it's called the Curia, it's called the Holy See. You may hear it called different things. It's most usually called the Vatican or the Curia, that administrative functions of the church in Rome. But when a bishop resigns, this would be more the case where he resigns, he lets the papal nuncio know, who in turn lets the Pope know. Now here in our diocese, there's, Bishop Finn may know a man who he feels may be qualified to be bishop for the diocese. There's most probably a list of other priests that maybe other bishops may know who within the diocese who who show those qualities to be a good leader, who are pastoral, who have real concern for the people. It doesn't just have to be a diocesan priest. Cameron and Christopher are studying for different dioceses. It could be a religious order priest. So like Abbot Gregory at Conception Abbey, he could be considered for a bishop. Father Ron, even though he's precious blood, he could be on the list to be considered for a bishop. These names are kind of collected together. They're sent to Rome to one of those councils or commissions that looks at all these things and kind of winnows them down and does background checks and looks at them, looks at their lives. They make a recommendation to the Pope. And even if, for our diocese, they may say, we feel that Pope John Smith is the best one. The Pope can still say, no, I think Peter Johnson would be the best one. It has to receive final approval from the Pope. So our local leader has been appointed by the Pope. So here again, we don't have much of a say. In the past, people elected their popes. The faithful elected the Pope. They knew who was most qualified to be a leader to them, who showed real concern for the poor and the sick, maybe didn't favor the wealthy. They knew who those men were, and they elected their bishops. Today, we have our bishop appointed for us. Okay? But the bishop, just like the Pope has the Curia or the Vatican, the bishop's office, you may have heard something called the Chancery. And this is located down in Kansas City. They've moved the offices, I want to say it's like somewhere along Armour Boulevard. Now, I should say, if you ever want to do a little more looking at this, the Vatican has a website. I think it's vatican.va. Our diocese has a website. I think it's kcstjoe.org. And did anybody see who the newest, most famous tweeter is in the world now? It's the Pope. Pope Benedict XVI now has a Twitter account. I'm not sure what he's going to tweet or who he's going to follow. But I guess to some extent, that maybe the church sees that really social media like this, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blogs, this is where you meet, encounter the young people, more than you would encounter them like in a book. This is kind of the new tools for evangelization. So I haven't followed him yet. I kind of want to see. I kind of like to follow him to see what he has to say. But anyway, both the Vatican and Kansas City St. Joe are on the web. So if you want to go look at more the structure of how the diocese and the Vatican set up, the Vatican page, it's in French, it's in Italian, it's in English. I think it's in Japanese. It's in 7 or 8 different languages, and it's just all. You're really amazed at how, because it is a worldwide organization, maybe you shouldn't be that amazed at all the different departments that are there. For our diocese, just a little bit about our diocese, they had the Catholic Key, which is our diocesan newspaper. There's about 133,000 Catholics in our diocese, which makes it kind of small, really. I think they said it's about 15,000 square miles. There's not quite 100 churches. I think it's 98 parishes. And then I wasn't for sure the dividing, what's diocesan priest as opposed to religious priest, but we're really sort of a smaller diocese. There's, in the state of Missouri, there's Kansas City, St. Joe, Jeff City, the Archdiocese of St. Louis, and Springfield, Cape Girardeau. But there's 4 dioceses there's not 4 dioceses in Missouri, and I looked it up. In the United States, total, there's 197 dioceses. Okay, so 197, not quite 200 dioceses for the whole United States. Okay? But the bishop, once again, cannot run all facets of the diocese by himself. So at the Chancery, you have all these different departments. You have them for vocations, consecrated life, human rights, you have like the press, which would be the key. There's 25 different offices at the Chancery that help administer help the Pope administer the diocese. The bishop. I'm getting the Pope's a bishop, and I'm getting confused. Okay, so there's 25 offices here in our diocese that help Bishop Finn. And just as there's certain things that only the Pope can do, there's only certain things that the bishop can do. Most importantly, only the bishop can anoint priests. He can ordain priests. Excuse me, that's what I was looking for. And he's the ordinary minister for confirmation, although because of the program for RCIA and how we do it, Father Mark will help do it, but normally that office goes to the bishop. So, in all these 98 parishes that are in our diocese, Bishop Finn appoints a pastor for each parish. Okay? Now, it's a little different for us, for our parish, because we're under the guidance of the Precious Blood. And it's the same way if you were to go to like St. Gregory's in Maryville, St. Columba in Conception Junction, they're under the Benedictines. So they do it a little different way. But here in St. Joe, let's say at Our Lady of Guadalupe, the pastor there is Father Tom Ludwig. After 8 or 9 years, he'll move on. And Bishop Finn will look at all the priests available, look at those young men who have been ordained, and he'll send a new priest to take responsibility for Our Lady of Guadalupe, and then he would assign Father Tom Ludwig to another parish. It kind of is a chain reaction. He moves one, he moves another, he moves another, he moves another. Priests retire, priests want to be reassigned maybe to administrative offices at the chancery. This past year, our diocese, it was either 6 or 8 young men were ordained to the priesthood. It was the largest group they've had in quite a while. But pardon me?
Or some priests like become bishops or something.
Some priests can become a bishop, but that's really rare, because there's only maybe a little more than 200 and some bishops, and you figure how many priests there are. Not many priests are going to be ordained, would be elected to bishop. They can be, but that's very rare. It's like winning the Powerball, winning the $500 million Powerball. Didn't happen to me. but it's possible, yes. One of those priests could be elevated to the office of bishop. That's correct. Boy, thanks for all your questions. Thanks for all your questions. But it's the bishop who appoints the priest. In our case, he works with, who's the provincial for our diet? Who's the provincial here for Precious Blood?
Father Joe Nassel.
So Father Joe Nassel, Father Joe Nassel is sort of the leader of the Precious Blood community within this area. So when Father Ron's time to move on, the bishop will consult. Well, Father Joe Nassel will kind of look at what can be done. He'll make the suggestion to the bishop, and the bishop still has to give some kind of an approval for it. Okay? But once again, the point that I want to make is we don't select our pastors. Our pastors are selected for us. Our leaders are selected for us. Okay? Now, I want to do something real quick, just so that you won't have to hear me talk. I'd kind of like you to do it. This table, I'll give you one. There's a couple of questions I'd like you to look at and talk about. You can all discuss this. I would say over here, you can break up in groups of maybe 3 here. And I would say, if you 3. And there's 3 questions that kind of reflect, and I'm going to say you 2 and you 3. Okay? So there's just some questions I wanted to kind of think about as we talk about leadership. Okay? So what are the qualities of a good church leader? Do they differ in any way from the qualities that make a good leader in the secular world, like president, king, or businessman? What are the advantages and disadvantages of having a church leader selected for us? And do we, the lay faithful, have a leadership role in our parish? So just talk about these at your table. I would say like this table. Okay, if you want to, okay. So I would say like in groups of maybe no more than 3. Just there's like 3 different questions. Just talk about how we can see leadership in our Catholic Church.
The church probably have a better understanding of their members.
It's not that, it's pretty easy. I'll give you
where I used to live, after I left there pastor, he doesn't know anything about Hispanic culture. And he's trying to implement Filipino. They're building a church that looks more Filipino than it would Hispanic. And there's a lot of them that are not very happy. Yet they're expected to pay for it.
Yeah.
A number of been brought in from Africa, Asia, and there's difficulties with culture.
This is good.
Or with language, just getting at the things.
It reminds me that disrupted people's reality. I guess that's what you can't say the same.
It's part of it. And there's the qualifications, junction, change, helps grow. This is there are a lot of them that don't read pastor. Start your life ever payments? I said, no.
Awful lot of information to get from 10 to 20 weeks. And most of it, you don't have to know.
That's a good.
We can get me. No, just ask me. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. No, I'm still
I can see the advantage of having a church because you can have small
They don't. The Blues Alliance was founded by men with a specific goal in mind that went to the Pope
It will.
and the time. Sort of like if you went to the president and you said, okay, I want to break off a little bit from what you're doing. I want to take a special job within the country, but with a special job in mind. And then the president said, well, okay, no. Basically, that's what
Okay, why don't you just have one more minute to kind of discuss at your table, then we'll go back to the presentation.
Voice.
decided they wanted the Jesuits to come. So he went to the Pope and said, I want to hold my own officials, people who have different countries. That's all. It's interesting. And there were thousands and thousands of those who never even know most of them. I mean, within the Franciscans, I can think of at least 20 different orders. And Teal Ross, there's all sorts of them. But basically what they do is they take another route, mostly from Parliament. So if you become a Jesuit, you don't own anything. You have to go through the provincial to get anything. You give them a stipend of maybe $30 a month.
Okay,
But of course you
We,
have to get fed and everything.
so we'll almost finish with our presentation here. I'm just curious, does anybody want to share what qualities made a good church leader?
We will.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I'm Josh. We put that a good church leader should be compassionate, wise, well-spoken, strong faith. They should be well organized,
Did anybody have other qualities that they wanted to share, or that they piggybacked on these that were given? Okay. This is one of those things that can be very, it's very subjective, and it never fails whenever, whenever Father Ron leaves or we get a new pastor, there'll always be some parishioners who are not very happy. Well, that's not the way Father Ron did it, this and that, and this and that. And people will get upset. Sometimes people even left the church left the parish because they didn't like the priest. I think this happens more within the diocesan parishes here, but if Father Tom leaves and people feel like they've really made an attachment to him, and then he leaves and they don't like the new priest and they want to go someplace else. Really, our commitment is to the church, not to an individual leader, because our parish leaders are going to change. So our real commitment is to the parish and to the people, not so much to our leaders. But most of us, we live out our faith life in the parish. You're going to be meeting the bishop at one of the ceremonies for RCIA. Like my parents, I think the only time they met the bishop was when he had a mass for their 50th anniversary. All the people gathered together and they saw the bishop there. Most people live their faith life within the parish. And here the head of every parish is a pastor. And our pastor is Father Ron. Here at our parish, you may have seen something called the parish council. Now, we're kind of unique in this setup. Not every parish you go to has this body, a parish council. A parish council really is kind of it's an advisory body. It advises Father Ron and parish staff. They're not an administrative body. So they're not going to, they're not going to veto the budget. They're not going to veto Charlotte being something like head of RCIA. They're really more advisory. They hear the concerns of the parish. They meet together as a group. They pray about them. Father Ron's at the meeting. They may get new ideas, maybe some parishioner. Have you heard at the end of Sunday Mass, they usually say there's a member of the parish council in the gathering space waiting to hear what you have to say. So my guess is, not having served on parish council, I bet they hear all kinds of things. But it could be anything from maybe snow removal in the wintertime to maybe we need a new ministry here at church. Maybe we need a ministry for young married couples. And then they talk about this at the parish council meeting, and Father looks at it and goes back to the parish staff. And the parish staff, if you look at the bulletin, like Connie, John Letts, those, Darren Pollard from the school, that's the parish staff. They're really the governing body for the parish, not so much the parish council. They're just an advisory group. I just looked at our church guide, the directory for 2012. Now, just like the Pope has the Curia and the Bishop has the Chancery, really Father Ron is responsible for the parish and the school and all the ministries that are involved. So if you had to take a guess, how many ministries do you think are here at St. Francis? And I just counted them out of the book, so I know the right answer. So just give me an answer as to how many ministries you think we have here at church. Anybody else? Okay, we have 56 ministries here. And each one of these ministries, Father is responsible for. He may not attend every meeting, but he really is responsible for what's going on here. And it could very well be that Father sees a new need for a new ministry and may look to someone in the church to fulfill that role. So Father has a great, Father Ron, the pastor, has a great deal of responsibility at the parish. It's a small business he's running, the school, the parish. He's taking care of the life of the faithful, the liturgies. And we have a lot of parishes don't even have maybe even 6. I've been to some churches that don't have, have very, very few. We're a very active parish. We've been blessed to have people who want to act within the community. But Father has Father Mark and Father Bill to help him. But once again, different, smaller churches, as I said, may not even have a parish council. Other parishes may do it something very different. They may have a different way to help not govern the church, but to have a vision for the church. What's my vision for St. Francis Xavier? Has anybody here gone to a parish council member after Mass and said, I have an idea? Has anybody done? Okay, Charlotte? Oh, good. I have to say, as a lifelong member, I've never done that. And I'm kind of ashamed now. Because it's like, really, well, what do we want our parish to be? Where do we want our parish to grow? How do we need our parish to move out and really fulfill its mission? And so that's how we do it here. So you can kind of see there is, for every, we look at the universal church, the diocesan church, the parish church, there is very much a clear leader that we have to put ourselves, like Paul says, St. Paul says, we have to put ourselves under their authority. We may not always like it, we may kind of chafe it if he challenges us, whether that's Father or the Bishop or the Pope, if we're challenged in some way and don't want to do something, or, you know, we really have to be obedient to them. This is not it's not something we like to think about. But as I said, you know, especially here where we're more democratic, we tend to think, well, if we all vote this way, then it'll be okay. And this isn't the case here. The church is not a democracy. It's set up to have clear leadership. And it can be leadership, you know, if the right men are in those positions, then there's not necessarily problems, but, you know, you have men who've been, you know, throughout history, let's say, you know, been popes, you know, who've misused their power, who are more interested in worldly power than the power of the church. But this is something that the lay faithful, we have to do, and then we have to find ways that we can use our leadership roles in the church as well. Okay? So that's pretty much the presentation. So are there any more questions or any more? I think we're ready for a break.
Jerry,
Oh,
I might say too, you said like pastor is responsible for all that, so, but he's responsible for the church, but you know, he's not necessarily, we need to help, because, you know, after Mass, just think what happens if all those bulletins are left in the pew and the gum wrappers are left here, and when you go out, if you walk out of here and there's a piece of paper in the parking lot, is Father Ron or Bill gonna have to pick that up, or, you know, we need to help do that.
yeah. Well, and what I really was trying to say is every organization, however you see that, the family work, needs a clear person to whom they're responsible for that organization. Now, is Father Ron responsible for a piece of paper? No. But he clearly has responsibility, you know, ultimate responsibility. You know, you may want to say, well, does ultimate responsibility for the grounds lay with Father? If Father doesn't care, you know, people will leave their trash. I mean, so kind of yes and kind of no. He needs to be able to set a vision. You know, we have a grounds committee here, and he has a, you know, there's a chair for that. So to some extent, yes and no. If Father doesn't care how it looks, then, and Father Ron cares how it looks. So, and that speaks to, I think that speaks to the different ministries here. It's enough that the priests have thought about these things to say, we really need a groundskeeping committee. We need a funeral lynching committee. So what I was trying to say is ultimate responsibility rests with him. I think that's still, not for every little thing, but he is responsible for all these. To some extent, he's responsible for what we're saying here. He can't stop me, but he is responsible for like the content of our RCAA. He's responsible for it. So if you ever see Father, you know, going, you know, running to meeting, you know, say, that's why they need our prayers, because that's a lot he has to do to take care of the church, the school, the liturgies, you know, personnel, finance, 56 committees. That's a lot of work. We don't want to run them into the ground, or any parish priest into the ground. That's why we should always pray for our church leaders too. Thank you, Dan. Okay? I think we're ready for a break.
Ready. Just so you know, this is sweet